So today's topic for Spanish Club is food, and then we'll go a little bit into the parts of a menu and then ordering at a restaurant. Um, if I was at Bloomsburg for teaching this lesson, I would go to the toy library and get the play food they have there, because a lot of the terms and vocabulary we're learning with food are more common items. So I could easily bring a visual, so then I could use that throughout the different activities. So this is the vocabulary for today. So the word comida means food. So it's dia de comida, or day of food. With this, I'm going to go more in depth into how I would do the vocabulary with them, just because it's a little different. So food has a lot to do with the culture. So I would explain about the Spanish culture while discussing food. So one important thing to keep in mind is when we're looking at the language, there's Spain Spanish and then Latin America Spanish. I chose to do vocabulary mostly from Latin America just because um, if students would be like authentically using the vocabulary, they're typically interacting with those from Latin America, like Latin America, Central America, South America, just because there's a wider population. So we start with our three meals. So we have desayuno for breakfast, almuerzo for lunch, and cena for dinner. So the cultural aspect for this would be the portion sizes and the time of day. So typically we eat breakfast like right when we wake up, and some people have larger breakfasts, some people have smaller breakfasts, like it varies. But in the Spanish culture, they have a small breakfast. It's usually a little later, like around 10, rather than when they just wake up. And then they have almuerzo, which is lunch, and this is their biggest meal of the day. And they typically eat this around 2 to 3. And then they eat cena or dinner between like 7 and like 9 or 10. So it's a later meal, and it's smaller than lunch. It's obviously bigger than breakfast, but it differs. And then depending on like where they live, would determine like what kind of food they eat at each one. So because that's so specific, I wouldn't get into that. So then I have these next chunks of vocab kind of broken up with like specific meals, so like breakfast, lunch, dinner, desserts, side dishes, and drinks, because we'll be doing an activity later on where it'll help them if everything's sorted out. So I wouldn't point this out though because we'll be doing an activity with it, which you'll see later on. So I also chose to do vocabulary that they would typically use in their lives, because then they'll be able to authentically use it. Obviously, like people in the middle of Peru aren't eating hot dogs and like hamburgers and stuff like that, but I just wanted to try to do vocab that they would find useful. So huevos, which are eggs, pan tostado, which is toast, because the word pan is bread. Then we have panqueques, waffles, cereal, and fruta. Um, if they want to use a specific fruit in their activities, I'm familiar enough with like the different fruits and like the terms and stuff for that in Spanish, so I could just easily tell them rather than overwhelming them with like 5 different fruits. Or yeah, so we have like manzanas for apples, uvas for grapes, bananas for bananas, naranja for oranges, piña for pineapple, things like that. So then we get into the next part, which is more of our cognates. Um, I forget if I said this before, but because there's so many cognates, um, they don't necessarily need to like memorize like the Spanish word and English word. It's just like a slight pronunciation difference. So we have sandwich for sandwich, ensalada for salad, and pizza for pizza. And then with the cognate part I'd get into is because Latin America is so close to the United States that our culture kind of influences that a lot. Like we brought like pizza and like hot dogs and hamburgers into their countries rather than them like authentically just coming up with the same idea of having a hot dog. So instead of having a different name, they typically just use the English version of it. So then we'll go down to what is like more of the dinner section, so like the main dishes. So we have hot dog for a hot dog. They usually just say el hot dog. Sometimes people think perro caliente, like the literal translation, but that doesn't like have the same translation when you look at it. Then we have hamburguesa for hamburger, bistec for steak, tacos for tacos. And I point out that's more of a Mexican dish rather than like everybody who speaks Spanish making tacos. Spaghetti for spaghetti, pollo for chicken, and pescado for fish. And then I make a connection to our last week's lesson where, or 2 weeks ago, sorry, with fish where it was pez because it was alive, but now that it is food and no longer alive, it's pescado. So then we get to our desserts. So we have pastel for cake, torta for pie. These two words can be interchangeable, and typically, depending on whichever country you're in, they have a different term for it. But these are the most like broadly terms. Like a couple countries use these translations. Then we have galleta for cookie or galletas for cookies, and then helado for ice cream. And then we get into our side dishes. So we have papas fritas for French fries, and the word papa. So we saw papa when we talked about families for when you say like daddy for your dad, but then papas are potatoes. So the translation is like fried potatoes. Then we have sopa for soup. It looks like the word soap, but soap is actually jabón, so it's a little different. Then we have papas con salsa, which are chips and salsa. We see the word papas again for the potato because the chips are a potato product. And same thing, papas con queso, which you might have heard of before with like Doritos, or like if you get cheese, some of them are just called queso. Then we have vegetal for vegetables, and then arroz for rice. So this is another cultural thing I would talk about is the importance of arroz. So for Spanish rice, it's typically like more of a drier rice. Like you can think of like the white sticky rice that you might get with like Chinese food or something like that. But Spanish rice is like yellow and typically more dry. And it's incorporated into a lot of meals like throughout all of the countries. So there's arroz con pollo, arroz y frijoles, like rice and chicken, rice and beans. So it's just a very staple of the diet. And then we get into our drinks. So we have leche, which is milk. So if we want chocolate milk, we could say leche con chocolate, or with strawberry milk, leche con fresas. Then we have agua for water. Then we have té for tea. We would talk about this with the E in té, like why it makes more of the A sound, like why it's not the, but té. And this would take us back to, I believe, day 2, where we talked about the pronunciation of letters in Spanish to help try to make that connection. Then we have jugo for juice. So this is probably where they would want to know specific fruits. And then smoothie for smoothie. So that's the vocabulary with that. So then once we would finish this, we would do a quick word sort. So I would cut up all the words. So as a table, then they would have to sort out which food went in which category for desayuno, which is breakfast, almuerzo, which is lunch, and cena, which is dinner, along with postres for desserts. So they would have to come up with what fit where. And then we would do a little would you rather game. So it would be where students would go to either side of the room, like if they agree or disagree. So I would do some like silly ones like panqueques con vegetales, so like vegetable pancakes, or tacos de pollo, like chicken tacos. So like things like that where they kind of have to look at the vocabulary and like put it together and decide where to go. Depending on how into that they were, I would extend that or keep it shorter because it may be a little difficult for them to be looking at the sheets constantly. And then anytime we mentioned a specific food, I would hold up the play food that corresponded with that item to just help try to create a visual as well. So now that they're familiar enough with the different types of food, we would go into our next activity. So we're going to be creating our own menus. So they're going to pretend like they're running their own restaurant, and everybody will be given a big piece of construction paper, and then we'll fold it hamburger style to make it like a foldable menu. And they will get to decide what their restaurant is serving. So to go along with this, I would hand out menu vocabulary. So they don't really have to know this, but it would just help them when organizing their menus. So they can be as creative as they want with this. So they can have like a breakfast menu section, a lunch menu section, a dinner menu section, or they can just do like appetizers, specials, meal, side dishes, drinks, desserts. Like it's kind of up to them what they want their restaurant to be. They could also have it as a cafe if they don't want to do a restaurant, or they could do like a diner. So they can come up with their own name and kind of do what they want. But on top of this, I wanted to give them the vocabulary in case they wanted to do specific sections like you see in like more fancy restaurants with like appetizers, main meals, side dishes, stuff like that. So menu is the word for menu in Spanish. So it's almost the same as English, but it just has the accent over you, over the U. And then we have especialidades for specials, so like if they're having like a sale or something like that. Then we have aperitivos or tapas. So this is for appetizers, and this is another slight cultural thing. So in Spain they have tapas, whereas if you're in Latin America, they do aperitivos, which are appetizers. So tapas are more, you get smaller portions of multiple things, and then it's like an appetizer for the whole table, whereas like aperitivos are just like our typical like American appetizers where you like get something for yourself, like yeah. And then plato principal is main meal, so like the principal plate. Then we have acompañamientos, which are side dishes. So this is a very long and confusing word, so we would take some time practicing this. And then we have bebidas for drinks and postres for desserts. So I'd give them probably like 7-ish minutes to create their own menu. So at their tables, I'll give them probably like 30 seconds each to show off like their menu and be like, oh, this is the restaurant. I'd probably be like, oh, does somebody like want to raise their hand and say what the restaurant's called and like kind of describe it a little bit, things like that. And then I would count the students off. So like 1, 2, 3, 4, that kind of thing. And there's typically 19, but if somebody's absent, we'd have 18. So it'd be like the ones go with ones, twos go with twos, stuff like that. And then once they're with their new partner, I will give them 2 minutes. So the first minute, the one person is going over their menu. So like this is what it's called. These are the sections saying like what kind of food they offer. And then after the first minute, I'll say switch, and then the second person will show off their menu and kind of describe what it is. So the next activity that we'll be doing is more of a role play type thing. So they'll still be using their menus. One of the students will be a waiter or waitress, and the other one will be the customer. So I have the vocabulary up on the screen that I would give them for the role play. So I'll just go over that with you. So we have camarero, which is waiter, camarera, which is waitress, ¿qué quieres comer? What do you want to eat? Quiero, which is I want, más, which is more, ¿tienes especialidades? Do you have specials? And our last one, la cuenta, por favor. So these are words that the students can use. So the waiter would say, ¿qué quieres comer? And then the customer would say, quiero, and they would list the foods they want. Now, this part depends on how much fake food there is in the toy library. So theoretically, I would have the waiter then go up to the front table and grab the whatever item that the customer requested and to hand it to them. And then, so if the food wasn't there, they can come back to the table and say no. And then after the customer eats the food, then the waiter returns that food item to the front table. So then all the other waiters can grab the food. If there's not enough food, the waiters will just pretend that they're getting food. So then the waiter can say mas, and the customer can say if they want more food, so they could like go down through like breakfast, lunch, dinner, or they can just like order one thing. And then once the customer is done eating, like they don't want to order any more food, then they end the skit with la cuenta por favor, like the check please. They can also use the phrase tienes especialidades, and then the waiter can come up with in their head like if they have any specials or whatever. So depending on how into this the kids are, obviously the waiter / waitress and customer would switch, so they all get turns. But if while I'm walking around, I'm like monitoring for like comprehension and like understanding and stuff like that, if they're only really ordering like one food at a time and then switching, then I would start to do like a rotation type thing with partners, so they're working with different people. But if they're ordering like full like 5 different things each time and then switching, I would probably keep the partners the same. This would also depend on how much time we have left. But with this, they get to use their menu vocabulary, they get to use the restaurant vocabulary, and then the food vocabulary that we've gone over today. This is very practical. Like I feel like they can relate to this if they've ever been to a restaurant before and with the different types of foods they eat. And then as always, as they're finishing up the activity, I would hand out the star sheet that has all the vocabulary we went over in the same place. And then we would line up and then they'd go out to meet their parents.